Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, nice to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you, Brandon.
So first of all, you sent some links with the thing you're working on with I think it was crowdfunding on Bound, and so I looked for the book, and I guess it's not published yet, then, right?
No, it's not published yet. Yeah.
All right. So you got maybe I have a book I've been working on for a long time as well.
Yeah.
People ask me like, I thought I was going to come out with it in March of this year, but it's a little further out, so I'm not exactly sure. So I don't know what your schedule is for publishing your book there.
End of this year. So
All right.
I'm just now breaking through a 3-year writer's block. So.
Well, I listened to your podcast, and it would actually the one you did with I can't remember the guy, but so it
Google
was
guy.
around the time that I was trying to figure. I was kind of brainstorming on this one element of something I'm writing, and it was like, well, wait a second, that's it. That's what I need. So I got this mad scientist vision, right?
Good.
That it's where in order to get deep sense making of the inner and outer world,
Yeah.
in order to people get on the same page with each other and have better peace and prosperity, we need compatibility with each other, and I'm aware of different approaches to phenomenology, and this is what I think is key here. And I was hearing some opinions on this and like different ways of going about it. In fact, I have this book. It's the Encyclopedia of Phenomenology, and they're going through different versions of it. And I understand there's three main versions or three major approaches, and that's one is like meditative, like I'm just gonna try to put everything out aside, just understand, like in a withdraw from the world, meditate, and try to rebuild things, try to understand things from that approach. There's also, and that's the transcendental, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or something. It also has echoes with Eastern philosophy, and that's a lot going on with that. There's the hermeneutic, which is like we're gonna interpret the there's a lot of different approaches to interpretation as well, and it's very social, very involving what's the main motivations and what's the main power structures. There's just so many different variations of that. And then there's the existential, which is you have it's a little difficult to explain it in concise terms, but it definitely involves and you're aware because I can tell that this is what you're working on, or it's it involves you're not actively trying to solve a problem in your life. You just go about your life, and when there's problems or angst that arises, and there's you have a little bit of a pay attention to the problems and the relation of your body to, and tension within your body to the world, and then it becomes a little more the meaning and purpose is something that can be illuminated by going about the mundane life, and then the tension within your body, you might sort that out in that. And then so I was thinking there should be, I was thinking a few weeks ago, there should be like, multiple approaches to that as well. And I just couldn't find that. And I was thinking, when I listened to your podcast, it sounded like you had different approaches that you were going through for that. And I wanted to list those because I already had this idea where I think, because I have there's some people, Hubert Dreyfus or whatever, and there's some people they're saying, oh, no, this is the right approach to phenomenology, or this one. And I was thinking you should go through each one of those three main ones, and you just pick an approach to each of the three, and then integrate it to like more objective science, and then there are different approaches to that as well. So I just want to make sure everybody, like that's why the way what I'm talking about with this book here, I want to go through this algorithm, this And I know that a lot of the phenomenologists would say, like, there is no one approach, but I want to suggest to check each of those boxes, just to say, there's different approaches you could take to all three, but try to do each of the three, because there are different perspectives. In order, like, you should have meditation be a part of it, and you should have, this existential approach be a part of it, and also the hermeneutic. And then once we get that, I think we can really get on the same page with each other across different cultures, different communities, so I think that's going to be part of this overall methodology I'm talking about. But I don't want to micromanage, or I don't want to suggest that it has to be rigid, because there are different approaches you can take to each one of those three. So I don't know if this is making any sense to you.
I'm about 85% with you. So let me just quickly recap. Your main objective is getting a handle on bridging divides.
Yeah.
So in my words, I would say we have these 9 billion people on this planet. Let me quickly write something down here. Are you okay with me just broadcasting this this discussion as we speak?
Sure.
It's also the first time I try this, so we're right on the cutting edge of technological development and effectiveness. 3, 2, 1.
Well, now, if anybody else might be joining, I can start with a little more basic background of what I'm doing.
Sure, but let me first recap where I'm at now, and then then we can always start over again. So what I hear and what I've heard in your, by the way, very excellent podcast, you're trying to bridge divides. So we're 9 billion people in my word, or my vocabulary, 9 billion reality tunnels. So each of us have this very specific array of experiences, sensory experiences, internal experiences, judgments upon those experiences, for which one way or another we all need to come up with some operating model of sense making. And sense making I would define as a very biological activity, and that is translating input into action. Can you work with that?
Yes.
All right. What I further heard you say is that when we're looking at how different people try to not so much only navigate their sense-making skills, but specifically upgrade them. Like, okay, wait a minute. I have my conditioning from my family. I have my conditioning from my from the country I'm born in or I live in. I have my conditioning from my education or work background. And at some point, some of us, most of us, might come to the conclusion, okay, what I've done so far isn't working anymore. I am looking for a better way of making sense of the situation in my life, and making better sense of the situation in the world.
Yeah.
All right. Am I so far with you?
Yes.
Good. Now, having decided that one wants to change, there seem to be a variety of paths available. And you mentioned 3 of them. There is sort of, well, what you named it, the Transcendental Path, meditating, taking a step back from all the sensory input, and just observing with a newfound curiosity and open-mindedness to the actual experiences that we may find in our consciousness.
Yes.
There is and I love the fact that you named that. There is a hermeneutic approach, a very German approach, which, for me, actually, I don't know if you've read my background. I'm a cosmologist and astronomer by training, so I come from the hard sciences, and one of the big challenges in astronomy is that there is a fundamental law concerning the sharpness or the resolution that any instrument can achieve in perceiving reality, at least as long as waves or electromagnetic radiation are concerned. And especially in radio astronomy, sometimes we work with very strange eyes, like an eye that is not like a telescope, but I have many little telescopes distributed over the surface of the Earth. And theoretically, I could simulate a telescope as big as the Earth with this collection of telescopes. The drawback is, though, because I don't actually have a telescope as big as the Earth, that I get a very noisy, what is called a point spread function. So even if I were to look at infinitesimal points, I have a precise, sharp point. When I look with an imprecise or with a finite instrument, I always get noise around this. And already 50 years ago, there was this beautiful algorithm. It's a very simple name. It's called CLEAN. And it tries to reconstruct the original image after having this imperfect image in my instrument. And this is what I also see what hermeneutic is doing, but then within our conscious experience. So I try to determine the biases that I have, the judgments, the prejudices, and I try to iteratively subtract these biases from my initial response, hopefully coming closer to a more balanced and inclusive perspective. Is that what you mean by the hermeneutic path?
Well, yes, and it could also be, I think, in terms of the social science or the the culture, which there are so many different approaches that what you're trying to many times they're trying to get out what are the main causes or the main motives of people, and the what's really going on in the background here, and just for example, I mean, it could be anything from there's more straightforward approaches, which are the linguistic, the more kind of literal linguistic approach to the Freudian psychoanalysis approach, to structuralist or deconstructionist approaches. There are various approaches, and that they're trying to get at the ultimate meaning behind the acts of communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the in this path, one of the most interesting questions I find is the question, or the what is it? The opposition of the real reason and the convenient reason. So often when people say something, why do you do this? They say the convenient reason. It's not a lie, it might be true, But if you were to change the circumstances of that reason, you would find that the person would still be doing this, because ultimately that was not the necessary reason for their action, and deeper underneath there is an actual necessary action. So I find this always gives either a very painful response when I project that on myself, or a humorous one when I convince myself that I see that in others. The third path you named the existential one, and referring specifically to this podcast you heard. I assume you're talking the one about embodied well-being together with Aluba Phoenix, executive coach at Google.
That was probably it, yes.
About embracing the discomfort in our bodies as a pathway to actually a higher well-being and freedom.
Yes.
Yeah. What I heard you say was you see that as, maybe in my words, a very embodied path. Like,
yes.
Okay, where the transcendental is taking a step back from life, the hermeneutic might be a very intellectual or social path. The existential is more related to the actual moment. And I liked what you said, where you're not actually trying to solve a specific problem, but you're trying, or at least I would say I am trying to develop a closer and more personal relationship to reality itself, or whatever definition of reality we might be tempted to use.
Yes.
Could you say something a little bit more about how these three paths reflect your life and your I don't want to say priorities, but where do you come from?
Well, I think that I started off really, it resonated with me, the transcendental path.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was having many discussions with people who had other approaches, an existential path or a transcendent or a hermeneutic path, in order to, as the primary way of developing better intersubjectivity,
Mm-hmm.
and having this deep sense making
Mm-hmm.
of the inner world.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, something that you were talking about with those sensors, or I'm sorry, what were they? You were talking about satellite dishes or something.
No, the radio telescopes.
Radio telescopes, and this is another notion of the transjective. That's a new word that I learned a couple months ago, and this is where if you already start with the distinction between the objective and the intersubjective, and I imagine you probably are familiar with this, but just to kind of summarize that, objective, is if you have a good analogy is you have scientists and journalists aim for objectivity in their reporting, so that what they're describing or what they're explaining, anybody else could see the same thing or understand the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's public access knowledge. It's something they've minimized biases, and I don't think it's possible to completely eliminate biases, but it is the most bias-free description of things. Usually it involves measurement.
Mm-hmm.
I can measure this thing, and intersubjective is, is typically what we're talking about is a collective imaginary.
Mm-hmm.
The things that the world revolves around, but they're not tangible.
Mm-hmm.
We have governments, we have laws, we have money. I personally think that there's certain things that are kind of transcend that as well.
Mm-hmm.
The is that there are core values. We have certain, we're genetically similar to the point where we might be able to uncover those layers of the collective imaginary to get to a collective, universal that is would prove that we have this compatibility, this deep compatibility across different cultures, even
And
though
I would add different species.
yes, and in fact, if we have beings that are feeling, thinking to an extent, then there should be that compatibility as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the transjective is an interesting notion because it's where things might appear to be objective, but there's the individual observer and their way of observing and measuring could actually be a little bit different depending on my measurement. There is that relation between the observer and the observed that is not going to be fully objective. And this could even happen in the hard sciences,
Okay.
because it seemed like what you were saying with those. And again, there were sensors or satellites. Like I'm sorry.
Satellite usage.
Yes. Now, normally you wouldn't see that so much in the hard sciences, but it does happen more in sociology,
Mm-hmm.
where someone's social position, standing within or social relation to others within the community, that impacts what they see or what they
Mm-hmm.
do in such a way that you actually can't really get that. If you look at a social situation purely objectively, you're not actually, because you're not that person, you're not in their social
Mm-hmm.
position, you're not going to get or understand what's going on there. So that's the transjective.
Interesting point. Yeah.
But anyway, where I came to this is I was talking to enough of people about how we would go about this, that I saw that there were these three main categories. And it wasn't just that. I mean, I'm reading some books. In fact, there's a book behind me that's the Encyclopedia of Phenomenology. Now, I think that they tried to split hairs a bit more than I wanted to, because they identified so many different categories of it. But it seemed like you could group it into just these three,
Mm-hmm.
and that I think that it's the way I want to go about it is that rather than to privilege one of those three, that it would be most useful to make sure that you go through each of these three, and
Mm-hmm.
to try to deal with these large scale social issues or problems that we have, to try to work toward compatibility across different communities
Mm-hmm.
or different ideologies or things like that. And these all three of these can be seen as kind of a cognitive mental information gathering processes
Mm-hmm.
that you can then use to integrate with the more objective sciences. There's an objective way of going about psychology and economics and political science, sociology, biology. But the notion of phenomenology is that there can be a intersubjective information gathering that you wouldn't be able to get if you rely entirely on the objective sciences. We can do brain scans. We can say, well, that's everything there in terms of your experience or your psychology, your neurocognitive understanding, but there's that dimension. There's that inner world, my inner world, your inner world. In order to get that data, that information, probably not going to be quantitative, but there's enough there that's something we need to take quite seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say that if we go through all three of those approaches as best we can, and then we can integrate it with the rest of the sciences that we know.
Mm-hmm. What um in the beginning of our talk you started something um how, quite simply, what are you looking for from me? How can I help this investigation that you're sharing with me?
Well, we wanted to bounce some ideas off you for one thing, and also that I could see that there were lists that were compiled of different ways to go about transcendental or meditative approaches or mindfulness. Also, different approaches for interpretation and for hermeneutics.
Mm-hmm.
And but in terms of the embodied or existential approach, or different approaches within that general path, I couldn't as easily find sources for that.
That's a good one. Let me quickly pull up some material here. It's actually quite interesting that at various levels I have found this interest in I would translate it now in unlocking the human potential. That's the best way I can put it right now. I've worked at a large Dutch technology institute for 10 years, mostly in the field of data science, AI, and smart mobility. But of course, you build a network of other enthusiastic scientists. And at some point, one of them sent me forward a project they were doing for the military, actually. Project was called Power Up Your Mind. And let me see if I have a presentation of that, where they were also trying to look at what are the total number of possible interventions that we can do to increase somebody's autonomy, effectiveness, resilience. There are, of course, many dimensions that we can look at in order to improve our value as human beings for ourselves and for our surroundings. And I don't think I have the... No, I still have to integrate that work from TNO into my own, but I can share with you this slide deck from the body-oriented masterclass, Well-Being with Impact.
Oh, that'd be great. Wow, yeah.
Yes. PowerPoint, yes.
So I'm not sure, now you're broadcasting this. One thing I didn't introduce myself. You know
Yes.
who I am. So I'm Brandon Norgaard of the Enlightened Worldview Project, working on a book project. And Bjorn here a few minutes ago said that, mentioned that was in this podcast episode, which he listened to. If anybody else is interested, the podcast series is called Glider Cell, which you can, it's on a variety of podcast platforms. And there was an episode that I appeared in a few months ago, which I think was, the title was Overcoming Divisions.
Mm-hmm. I was writing a blog post about that, so let me see if I already published that. Stories published. No, it doesn't look like it. Can you see already something?
Yes, yes.
Does this work? What do you see now?
I see your, it says Google Well-Being with Impact.
Just as a full screen, or do you see my slide notes?
Actually, I see the slide notes
let me. Practice makes perfect, right? Now you should see a full.
Yes. Yes.
Let me quickly walk through this. Well, Google mission, do the right thing. That was for me a big turn on. And also a trigger, by the way, where in the past it is don't be evil, and now it's do the right thing. I love the optimism. At the same time, okay, that's a challenge.
I think they're both variations of Hippocrates' slogan, do no harm.
Yeah. I'm quickly skipping through the management rationale. So well-being, this was the core. So let's just quickly tune into that and pluck on the 3 dimensions of well-being. So first, the most familiar definition of well-being that we have in Western society is what I would call a hedonistic well-being, which basically is the simultaneous maximalization of pleasure and the minimalization of suffering. Very comfort oriented, a great driver for productivity, starting at the Stone Age, down to now the Information Age. It served us well, and at the same time, what the main argument in this interview with Aluba Phoenix was that this is also a very dangerous motivation because we tend to identify our comfort zone with our safety zone. A comfort zone generally arises around a safety zone, but when that safety zone shifts and we just focus on our comfort zone, then we can actually be very, very far removed from our actual safety zone, without being aware of that. And when we're talking about global sense making, that is my main paradigm that I would suggest people to investigate. Like, can you actually see arguments for this, for the usefulness of this perspective, that as a society and as a collection of individuals, we no longer live in our safety zone. We're only living on our comfort zone. And in order to become safe again, we need to embark on a journey. This is where Aristoteles comes in, where he actually claims being comfortable and pleasurable is not the highest happiness, the highest level of well-being that one can achieve. There is actually something called an eudaimonic well-being. And the daemon is the thing that rides us, that somewhere each and every one of us has I think you would call it maybe even a transjective, but at least something intrasubjective, something inside us as a person that drives our actions. I was just reading this beautiful biography of Alexander the Great by Stephen Pressfield, I believe, where he is showing this struggle by Alexander the Great that just keeps him pushing forward, even though, it's a harsh journey for him and his men, but there's something inside him that is yearning to reach his full potential. And the danger of this demon is that when you fully succumb to it, you lose your humanity, you lose the gift that this demonic entity actually wants to give to you. So a lot about that journey is for him coming to terms, yes, there is this drive in me, and I have to be present to what this drive wants from me, and I have set limits to it, and I can leverage it much better when I take a conscious approach to that drive, as opposed to just surrendering and being monomaniacally oriented at conquering the world. The third dimension is where these two intersect. That we often see growth as something very painful, as taking a lot of effort. Speaking just for myself, I'm rather lazy than tired, at least often, unless the tiredness comes with a very specific set of challenges that really catch me at my core, where I'm saying like, okay, wait a minute, now I'm having so much fun suffering through this. I'm not going to give up now. And that brings me to the roadmap that I have worked with so far. This is not mine. I'm not quite sure what the source is. When I write my blog post about this, I will certainly mention it. But at least we can identify some very different realms that we could engage in to increase our embodied human potential. So the psychology is, of course, one. Positive psychology being the first forerunner of this mindfulness meditation. We see transformational growth. What I miss here is the intersubjective and social aspect of this, where I believe that we are mistaken in believing that we actually have an independent ego, and everything points towards that we are much more intersubjective beings than Western society wants us to believe. So growth can actually only really happen in a social context, and the fastest way here of growing is changing your environment. So you are not who you think you are. You are who you think that the 5 people closest to you think you are. That would be my shorthand for what our ego, or rather the egoing process, because it's more an activity than an entity, the egoing process entails.
Yes, exactly. And when I explain to people the book that I'm working on, and I say, well, it's kind of like, it's a little bit like the self-help genre, which is so focused on and your self-actualization and maximization of your potential and well-being and all that. But can you really do that if you're living in a world with so much tension in your community and the world as a whole? Can you really do that? So that's what I'm trying to say is, I try to say, well, my book is both about that, but it's also a large scale, therapy session, where you take people into the therapy room and, like family therapy or whatever. But can we do that on a community wide level, and that's kind of what I'm thinking here. And I think that, your book is as well, the one you've been working on your book, it sounds like, in a similar sort of genre that doesn't really exist yet.
Yes.
This is something we're trying to build this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think you see that right. It's an interesting marriage between the intersubjective process of growth and actually identifying the important and necessary perspective for our collective growth. And it somewhere hangs the middle between scientific literature and self-help. You want me to continue with
Yes.
the roadmap?
Yes.
I'll save the best for last, at least for me. So we'll go clockwise and look at neurobiology. This actually is starting to be a pretty deep rabbit hole. But let's first look at the most actionable points here, where of course movement, acknowledging trauma that either developmentally or maybe even epigenetically was passed forward to our current experience. Movement, touch, and diet seem to be intimately connected with growth. For me, action sports was always a big entry point into feeling my body. So I did 16 years of full contact karate, few years of American football, and that's when I felt most alive. You know, just you don't see it here on Zoom, but I'm just a few inches short of 7 feet. So I'm quite big. And these were some environments where I could unleash some of the potential that I feel on a bodily level. 8 years ago, touch and sexuality became a powerful driver, especially by encountering the, I don't know, maybe 2,000-year-old art of Tantra, where actually by sexual abstinence, you supercharge some of your motivation. Temperature, since 2-3 years, I'm an avid fan of ice water. I did one Wim Hof training, and since then I discovered my body, and now I'm just building my own path, swimming half an hour. Well, no, I'm exaggerating. 10-15 minutes in Norway between the ice, and I notice like, oh, wait a minute, there is nothing here that my body can't handle, and it's incredible. The last thing, my wife actually is an expert in that, is enabling our hunting mode. So what most people don't know is we humans, at least Homo sapiens sapiens, have 3 very unique attributes compared to the rest of the animal kingdom. Now, you want to play a little game with that, Brandon?
Yes.
So what would you say is the number one anatomical variant that has driven our success as an animal species on this planet?
I think I remember hearing that it was our thumbs, but perhaps it's more complicated than that.
I would put thumbs at number 2. I'm talking about something that is drove our development of language, for example. That
our tongue, perhaps?
Say again?
Our tongue?
Maybe. Well, here in the picture, it's in the middle of our picture. It's a little bit orange.
Oh, well, then the part of the brain,
yeah,
the neocortex.
Neocortex, or the prefrontal cortex, exactly. Our capacity for abstract reasoning, I would argue, is currently at least our primary weapon, and I say weapon consciously, against the whole of the ecosystem of planet Earth. Now, what most people don't know is number 3. So there is a third organ that only one other animal has in the quantity that we have.
Huh. Well, you know, and it was, I had already mentioned tongue, so you're not talking about that. That was mentioned in John Verbekey's awakening from the meaning crisis, the effect that had on various things. So you're talking about something else.
Has something to do with our effectiveness as hunters on the African savanna.
Well, I don't know if you're talking about walking upright.
A little bit later than that.
Oh, okay. Well, gosh, I can't really right now think of what the answer would be.
Probably because you don't know that this is a uniquely distinguishing feature for most humans. So only horses and humans have the number of sweat glands that we have. So we have let's say, ludicrous number of sweat glands, which enabled us to embark on a very specific skill, which is endurance hunting. Which meant, like, when we're hunting a gazelle is of course faster than any human on Earth, but in the temperatures of Africa, these animals quickly become exhausted or start overheating. So early man apparently developed this skill using its opposable thumbs to carry weapons, its prefrontal cortex to track and communicate over large distances a prey animal, and then basically just to hunt these animals into exhaustion. Let me quickly turn this off. 1 moment. And from this age, we have inherited this metabolism where the cells in our body are not burning sugar, but they're burning ketones. And ketones, I don't know what kind of chemical they are, but ketones are chemicals that our liver can make itself from fat. So it's called a fat burning metabolism. Even though you're not burning fat directly, you still need your liver to translate that. And about 2 years ago, my wife convinced me to try this. And in the beginning, it's hard because, as a modern Western man, I've never refrained from eating any carbohydrates. So the cellular mechanisms in my body have rusted. My body didn't know it could do this. And in a 10-day training course, she helped me turn on this fat burning, and suddenly, I had much more focus. I was running as if my feet were walking itself. I was more courageous. I was more emotionally resilient. All these attributes that one could associate with being an effective hunter became turned on in my body. And that's still one of the key aspects that
I think you're talking about what I've known as the keto diet.
Correct.
Talking about
Correct.
something close to that.
Ketogenic metabolism. Yeah. Number 3, pharmacology. Last one on this list, psychedelics. There is this even crazier theory that psilocybin had actually a formative role in the development of Homo sapiens on the savannah, because there, in the dung of elephants, grew these psilocybin mushrooms. And psilocybin has, besides the psychedelic effect, has this very unique capability of turning off our default mode network. So a little neuroscience here. Our brain is incredibly expensive, energetically, size-wise, because women have to give birth to these huge heads. Our brain are our limiting factors. And if I were to ask you, what is the purpose of what is the real purpose So not the convenient purpose, but the real purpose of, let's say, evolution of developing a neocortex.
That's interesting because I've heard that simultaneous to that, humans became less fit physically speaking, less muscle
Yes.
and more energy in development of the, childhood and early adulthood into developing the brain.
Yes.
So that had, in order to get into an ecological niche that existed at that time, it wasn't that, humans needed to do that in order to conquer the world, because then at that time, humans were only in a small area of Africa. So it must have been that there was something going on there in those savannas. And I'm not sure if I'm able to answer the question there. There must have been something unique about it. Maybe perhaps, being able to operate in groups and being able to have the social cohesion. Is that maybe was it the, that you had the ability to have a nation culture that could be transferred from one generation to the next without it being lost. I think I just read that recently in Thomas Bjorkman's book, The World We Create.
Oh, cool. I haven't read that one yet. Yeah, I think you're onto something there. So our flexibility in dealing with our environment and in creating social cohesion was, of course, instrumental in our effectiveness as apex predators and surviving. But because of the energy budget that this huge brain of ours required, it simultaneously developed a secondary objective. And the secondary objective of our thinking is to stop thinking. Because thinking is great, I have a problem, I'm hungry, and in the past, when I was, a simple rodent, when I'm hungry, I go out foraging and I find something to eat. And now I'm no longer a rodent, I'm a human being, and I can create all these narratives about the world and remember, like, oh, last time I was hungry, I found this food there, and I did this, and suddenly I no longer was hungry. Great. What evolution built as, I call it sort of a screensaver. Maybe a screensaver is a nice way of putting it, is something called the default mode network. And the default mode network, I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that to be intimately related to our egoing process, because what the default mode network does is it throws away 90% of all sensory information. Been there, done that, 9 times out of 10. Yeah, I can process it all over again, but I will just burn up so many calories that unless there is a very specific reason, I just do business as usual.
That's the Gestalt process.
That, psychologically speaking, that would be the Gestalt process. Here we're talking about on a neurological level, these are superhighways of simplified connections between our different brain departments. And what psilocybin does, it shuts down this superhighway. So suddenly, at least already in micro doses, you're no longer operating from the simplified version of self, but you have access to a lot more information that is more tiring, yes, that can be overwhelming, yes, but ultimately when you train yourself in being present to that, can give you unique insights and information that fall outside of the paradigm of your previous existence as it is encoded in your default mode network. There are stronger plants and of course chemicals. LSD has a similar effect. By the way, what is interesting, as far as I understand, LSD shuts down the sugar supply to our neurons, and that sends our neurons into an overactivation because, oh shit, there's no more food. Let's get really alive right now. And I would describe the effect as an experienced psychonaut as dialing your perception filters to 13. Like there's nothing unique happening when you take LSD. It's just that the things that are happening during your normal waking consciousness are turned up to a volume that you've never experienced before. So now you can see the mechanisms, the projections of your mind under a microscope.
There was recently with the STOA. And I'm not sure if you've heard of the STOA based in Canada. Yep. They had a guy on, Evan McMullen, who was recently, they were asking him, how do you develop this mindfulness, and how do you develop, how do you optimize your mind? And he did admit, psychedelics is an important aspect of the whole thing. But, he also said, well, it's really easy to get abused or, to have it get, various, negative impacts. And so I think that what you're saying is that, if it's done in a controlled way, a lot of people do self-experiments and probably, they don't really know what they're doing. And so that you maybe would be able to recommend proper doses, or there are people out there who could do that, in a safer sort of way.
Definitely. And I think for anybody curious to investigate this, microdosing is as far as I understand, quite a safe way. So I'm collaborating with a assistant professor here in Holland, in Tilburg, who's doing research. She is actually a sociologist. In Maastricht, they're doing the medical experiments, but she's looking at, okay, what are now the psychosocial benefits of microdosing? Are they real? Are they a placebo effect because people tell you that it's effective? And that's a very illuminating and productive discourse I have with her. What I would really like to stress here, and at the same time, I'm very wary of the traditional, how you say, traditional law enforcement. There are plans, one being coming from South America, and one being coming from South Africa, that have an even higher impact on your ability to perceive reality. And one I would classify as a very typically feminine path, where the aliveness under reality is turned up to 13. It can be beautiful, it can be horrible, but it's a very intense and probably opening experience. The African path, on the other hand, is a very masculine one. It has nothing to do with recreational psychedelics, quite the opposite. It's a path of, I can imagine the journey that, what's this explorer called? I presume, Dr. Livingston, I presume. Like going as the first white man into deep, dark Africa and facing the headhunters and cannibals and basically facing death. This African plant has the very unique biochemical interaction that it attenuates your dopamine receptors. And it's a theory that Charles Ferrone put into the world, I think about 5 or 8 years ago. Like, hey, wait a minute. If we look at the global problems of inequality, of injustice, if we look at our individual incapability at dealing with temptation or dealing with challenges, could it be argued that this all can be led back to a dopamine-induced feedback loop in our perception system? That as long as some activity, be it embodied, chemical, or what else is there, technological, that as long as it induces dopamine, we become blind to the negative consequences of that action. And the easiest way to get a picture of that, especially for people who have, alcoholics in their surrounding, it's very hard to tell an alcoholic that he's alcoholic because of this mechanism. And what this plant does, it like with laser precision blocks these, not completely blocks, but attenuates these dopamine receptors. And the effect of that is, first you get to see all your shit. Like people who go on these journeys, this often describe that they're seeing the videotape of their life being rewound. And every time they've stepped out of integrity, they've lied, they've cheated, they didn't live up to their full potential, that is shown to them in a very clear and painful way. And having undergone this process myself, I can tell you that it is not as masochistic as it sounds, or as sadistic of this reality. The most beautiful thing that I've experienced during this process is that in the moment of facing that pain, that disappointment, that physical sensation of a wave of loss washing over me, that at the end, at the crescendo of this intensity, there is this moment of clarity where all physical sensation falls away. And I could just see the image triggering this in what I call naked masculine awareness. Like there's just the image. And yes, that happened. I did that. I fell short. And it's okay. It's okay. I'm still a worthy human being. I'm worthy of love. I'm worthy of self-love. And it's okay. And then like the process starts over again, over, and you just get smacked, depending on what kind of life you've led, a few times over the head, until finally all your karma is washed clean. And contrary to the South American path, the feminine path, this is not limited to an experience, intense experience in the moment, but these chemicals stay in your brain for 3 weeks, 3 to 6 weeks. So that means after having gone through this process, you have this window of opportunity where your dopamine-induced filter is taken away, and you get to see your life and the value of it as it is in the moment. The way I experienced it was very much like where normally, apparently, I oriented myself very much to what will the future bring me. And I didn't pay any attention to what is my experience in the current moment. and having undergone through this recalibration of my dopamine receptors, all future reward is gone. You know, it's empty. You're in a state of voluntarily induced depression without the negative self-talk loops that are normally associated with depression. So you're just at a very low energetic level, giving you the opportunity to just observe, like, okay, nothing is alive. What do I do? Okay, I can sit here on the couch. That's not very rewarding. I'll go for a walk. And you walk, and suddenly now, because you have this low baseline, the input from seeing a forest or hearing a bird has a much higher likelihood of actually entering your perception and your value system. Like, oh, wait a minute, that's actually quite beautiful. So it doesn't become impossible to enjoy things, but you become more aware of what is rewarding in the moment, as opposed to doing something for a future reward. And now I said a lot of things. Is this something you can relate to, Brandon, or is this so far out of your current experience?
I think this is what I was. This is why I contacted. This is why I wanted to talk to you further, because you were touching on this in some of the things that I heard, recorded before, and this is getting into the more details, and some of this perhaps I could try to summarize and
please
put into my own book.
Yes. Well, how would you summarize it in 3 sentences right now?
I'm not usually good at distilling things to 3 sentences without having a lot of time to deliberate over this.
Fair enough.
Now I did actually yesterday, though. I've trying to get at the essence of this approach, this existential or embodied approach. And I wrote this process usually begins when one is dealing with problems that arise in normal life. And one does not then withdraw and meditate and actively seek mindfulness as they would in the transcendental method. Instead, a deeper meaning of existence is sought through active engagement with the world, through circumspection, which we can, it's a careful observation of one's surroundings while going about life, mundane as it often is, and dealing with the occasional unexpected events that occur, wherein one might come to understand the relation between oneself and the world, including how their body is related to the world, and an integral part of it. The inner tensions and angst can then be put into perspective, which can allow one to cope with the world into which they have been thrown. And I don't know if that's too narrow, like maybe I can, replay this, and transcribe portions of this recording here and come to a broader definition, because you're getting into a lot of other things that are not captured there. In that.
I love your resume of the existential or embodied path. Just because I have a predilection to change, I find the embodied path somehow more meaningful than the existential, because existential has this association with a zero-sum game. Whereas I would argue that engaging the upper right quadrant of this roadmap can teach you that the embodied experience can be actually something incredibly meaningful, even when it isn't necessarily comfortable. Exercising, going to the gym is not always, or if you do it right, a very, when I would do it right, and not a very pleasurable experience. At the same time, it's deeply meaningful because I'm engaging my body in a way that, for example, it hasn't done so in a long time. So I'm curious to what kind of expansion of definition for this third part you come up with. I can also share with you all my Zoom dialogues are recorded and transcribed automatically. So I can send you to a transcription service where you can just have the raw text. You can, it has a voice recognition. So you see who said what. It's 95% perfect. So if you want to do me a favor, just edit your parts. You can, if you click on a word, it plays back the audio, and you can edit it and correct it. And I don't want to talk too much longer because my dog is reminding me of his embodied experience. So let me just quickly recap or not recap, quickly touch on the lower left, and that is using technology to interact or even measure the mind. And that's where the upper right-hand quadrant is, in my mind, slowly converging with technology, where our current understanding of reality, physics, and biology, which is entirely materialistic, is starting to show cracks. And at least for the open-minded among us, and I'm thinking about Roger Penrose, Nobel Prize winner of Physics 2020, where there seem to be actually biochemical mechanisms that could point towards the intersection of consciousness and physical reality. I'm talking about his collaboration with Dr. Hamerhoff, who is an anesthesiologist, which is actually the only practical scientific field that deals with the problem of turning on and off consciousness reliably. So we actually have about 150 years of practical experience with consciousness. We just never think about it in those terms. Other areas where I'm working on here is the quantified self. So can we use technology not as a means to distract ourselves, but as a means to improve our embodied experience? I'm talking about low-tech technology such as this supercharged Google package, which contained like a, what's it? A fakir, a pinprick pillow to put under your feet when you're working in your digital office, to keep your body stimulated so you don't completely disappear in some mental abstraction. The other thing I don't have handy is a shoulder harness you can wear to maintain an upright and open body posture, a massage ball to apply pressure point techniques. And I'm working on more high-tech, or working with more high-tech things, a device which is a Neuro Entrainment device. It's basically a strobe light that I can use to tempt your brain to fire in different brainwave patterns. And it's not as strong as LSD, yet it has a similar effect that it can guide you into different states of altered states of consciousness without the interaction of biochemicals, and just looking at a light with your eyes closed. And that I find incredibly interesting. That's the roadmap so far. Just to finish my monologue, I love these two pictures. When we're looking at global sense making right now. I've just heard, here in Holland there are riots because of the corona measures, and everybody is looking for some kind of sense making, like what is right, what is wrong. I would believe learning the value of perspective. So a friend of mine actually gifted me, where is it? Here. A model of reality. So this is my model of reality.
Yeah.
This blue plastic cube. And it's the same picture as this. It's just a 3D object. But when you look at it, it defies a unique categorization when I use language. So using language, I cannot uniquely define this. This object is not a B. It is, where we go. Is that it? No, like that. It's not a G. And it's not an E. It's something outside of the realm of language, and I can only describe a certain perspective of it as soon as I start to use language. And Gödel proved this formally. Hofstadter made this somewhat available in his Gödel Escherbach, from which this is the cover picture. He made it a lot more accessible in the book I Am a Strange Loop. So I can highly recommend that to anybody curious. That isn't, you don't need a philosophy or mathematics degree to read that book. And ultimately, I would encourage you to entertain this perspective, that no matter what the narrative, the only way to experience, or the only way to gain a new perspective, is to experience one. So find people around you who have walked a different path than you. Listen to their stories. Don't believe their stories. I always start my talk with heartfelt and wholehearted sentiment that I hope nobody believes a single word of what I've say. Mm-hmm. Because as soon as you believe one narrative, you lose sight of other potential narratives. So I would encourage, if you're struggling with autonomy, Rowan Andrews in the UK runs a No More Mr. Nice Guy boot camp. Sorry, I'm just plugging some friends here. In Norway, Ivan Skellum runs a very narrative-oriented Reclaim Your Inner Throne. Here in Holland, there is a masculine empowerment coach, Haye Pepping, who runs a program called Mankracht. I run Roguestar Experiences. Just started to collaborate with a friend of using role-playing, like D&D role-playing, as an instrument for personal and spiritual growth. He runs a company called D20 Entertainment. So, the path is wide and various.
All right. Excellent.
Yeah. Are you okay with us closing?
Yes.
Closing our talk for today.
Yeah, I think we covered quite a bit of ground here, and I'm. Thank you very much for taking the time to meet with me, and it's very fascinating the things you were talking about here, and and I'll look at that the video and the transcript, see if I can work more on my book, and I'll keep you in the loop on the book and in your book, your work as well.
Yep.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Don't hesitate to reach out. I will give you the necessary details. And this was a very interesting first meeting. Thank you, Brandon, for playing.
Yes, thank you very much.
Pleasure.